Morning in progress.
All right. Hello, my name is Joe Laczkowski, and I'm going to advocate for a policy change in the legalization of marijuana in Texas. There we go. So the problem is that Texas policy towards marijuana is just too conservative and too strict. Um, we have strict laws regarding medical and decriminalization, and there's no recreational use. But policy is changing towards marijuana. And its view, hemp has been legalized from the federal government, and Texas is allowing the use of CBD. So there are changes that are being made. Marijuana is classified as an illegal substance in Texas, which is a major problem. Lengthy sentences, large fines, and people go to jail with hardened criminals for sometimes small possession amounts. And more Texans are in support of policy changes towards marijuana. Support for decriminalization is very, very wide. Medical use is also support for that is very high. And there is large support, two-thirds support for recreational use. So a brief overview of the history of marijuana in the United States. So the Marijuana Tax Act made federal punishments for marijuana and basically made marijuana illegal in the United States. This was as a result of Mexican immigrants coming to the U.S. from the Mexican Revolution in 1910. Most of these immigrants, many of them were coming to Texas. Information was flying around about the negative effects of marijuana. Marijuana was traditionally used as an intoxicant by everyday Mexican citizens, Mexican farmers, and rumors were spread that it was very bad for society. And as this negative propaganda spread, the Marijuana Tax Act came out of it. Marijuana is classified as a Schedule One controlled substances under Controlled Substances Acts for the federal government. This is a substance that has no medical use. Other substances are heroin, LSD, ecstasy, and peyote. Heroin being a heavy, heavy drug, but marijuana is still classified with that. And as I want to emphasize, as not having medical use also. However, state law started to liberalize in the 1970s, but there was still a push on a federal level, about the negative effects of marijuana. There's the war on drugs, and marijuana was classified as a gateway drug. Everybody remembers Just Say No in the 1980s. But as times have changed, 23 states have legalized marijuana for recreational use. 14 states have legalized marijuana for medical use, and including several conservative states. Texas is not one of them, but two of note are Utah and Florida. Generally, as Florida does, so does Texas. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future. So the hemp was removed from the Controlled Substances Act recently, and hemp is what is used to where delta 9 THC comes from, and that is what is used to help make CBD products. So it's 0.3 it is 0.3% concentration or less of THC, and since that was made legal, that is now what we have and what is sold across the state of Texas. But federal laws and policy on marijuana is changing quite rapidly. Um, if you go to um, federal resources on it, it even says that that policies are changing. Check with your state too to see how they view it. But federal policy recently has changed quite a bit. Under the Obama administration, the Justice Department gave out the Cole Memorandum that said that state governments would not be punished by the federal government for legalizing marijuana. This was rescinded in the Trump administration, but Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, who was the Attorney General, one of a couple under Donald Trump, uh, did say that federal prosecutors should use their best judgment to when prosecuting marijuana cases. So here's a diagram of the states that have legalized in some way, shape, or form, and you can see Texas has not, even though we do have the CBD products that are legal. So Texas policy. Texas policy is fairly strict. We have not legalized it, and because of that, we are not breaking federal law. Those states who have legalized marijuana as medical or recreational use, they're all breaking federal law. Texas is just following the law. We do allow low THC and CBD, but that is allowable by federal law. We do have several laws that classify the criminal penalties for marijuana and regulate the hemp industry, which was made legal when it was removed from the Controlled Substances Act. So Chapter 481 of the Texas Health and Safety Code makes marijuana illegal to possess and distribute, and makes possession of 2 ounces or less a Class B misdemeanor. So there are heavy fines that are associated with it, and prison sentences also. HB 1325 started to regulate the hemp industry when it was taken off of the controlled substances list. And so there's licensing, penalties, administration. However, there is still some confusion on it because hemp does look very similar to marijuana. So there is confusion. I read some articles about how farmers were getting in trouble transporting because officers were unaware about the hemp laws. Texas does have the compassionate use program, which allows for the use of low THC cannabis. So this is 0.5% THC. So it is a little bit above the federal allowable amount. But this compassionate use program, these products are allowed to be used to treat basically seizure disorders. You have epilepsy, autism, PTSD, but these are changing to more and more conditions are being added to this program under different Senate and House bills. And it can only be issued to a person by licensed physicians. Licensed physicians must register with the Department of Public Safety, and those people who are using these products, if they get pulled over, they will also be registered through the Compassionate Use Registry program, or it's called PERT program, and so that way a person is not going to get in trouble. So Texas's policy is changing quite a bit, and this is the reason why we kind of need to take a change. Texas Agricultural Commissioner Sid Miller advocates for the expansion of medical marijuana. He says it's just the right thing to do to help those that are suffering. Governor Abbott is signaled opening up the possibility to decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana. I don't know if this is an election ploy or what, but Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is opposed to decriminalization. But there are changes to policy that are being made, though they're not being passed completely. HB 218 by Joe Moody out of El Paso would decriminalize small amounts of marijuana. This would also reclassify as a Class C misdemeanor. So you would just have a fine and you wouldn't go to jail. This is for small amounts. We're not talking about large amounts here. And the Texas House Criminal Jurisprudence Committee also said that there should be no penalties for marijuana possession under 1 ounce. So there is support, but it's difficult to pass. So HB 218 did pass, but it did not get through the Senate. So there are a lot of benefits and there are some negatives to decriminalization, legalization of medical marijuana, or legalization of recreational use of marijuana. Basically, the one main benefit is that you'd be making people in the state of Texas happy. 67% of Texans want support legalization of marijuana. That's high. That's higher than I thought. This was according to University of Houston Hobby School of Public Affairs poll. Support for medical marijuana is very, very high. 82% of Texans support medical marijuana, and decriminalization at 81%. If you look at this poll here, you can see the breakdown of it. Less support from Republicans. However, the support is over 50%. Pros are also it's there is support from the legislature and from our executive, not for legalization, but at least for decriminalization. But everything needs a step. It needs to start with something. City councils are also starting to decriminalize. Austin City Council decriminalized in 2020. Denton, a small town outside of Waco, Killeen. So cities are decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana possession. So there's going to be fines, and people aren't going to be arrested. Um, one of the main pros of marijuana legalization, if something would be passed for either medical or recreational, is there is going to be an increase of tax revenue. Texas would be able to regulate, and if Texas can get in before the federal government would pass a law, even more tax revenue. So this stat has to do with recreational marijuana use, but Colorado received 3 times the tax revenue from marijuana than it does from alcohol sales. It's a lot of money that Texas could get from this. $40 million went to public education. That doesn't seem that much because Texas needs much more, but there's a lot more people in Texas than there is for Colorado. Lots of jobs are going to be added. If Colorado added 18,000 jobs, and it's a much, much smaller state than Texas, what could Texas add? Um, a benefit would be the criminal justice system would not be burdened. 15 million arrests have been made for marijuana possession since 1995. About 800,000 arrests are made a year on a national level. Removing these arrests would severely lessen the burden on our criminal justice system. I know in Harris County, I don't live in Harris County, but in Harris County, when watching the news, they're burdened by all these cases. It takes a very long time for your case to get through. If this stuff gets removed from every other city and every other locality and all the other counties, this is a substantial burden that is removed from these places. $5.3 billion in savings would be made to state and local governments if marijuana would be decriminalized. So another thing too is the benefit would be helping people who were prevented from getting employment, from housing, government assistance, from getting these things. As long as decriminalization would happen with expungement of the record, then people could benefit and they could move on with their life. $1 billion a year is spent incarcerating people that have been convicted of marijuana possession. Texas is a large state, so our share of that $1 billion is much, much higher. Racial injustices could be rectified. Blacks and Hispanics are charged with marijuana possession at a much higher rate. If marijuana was decriminalized, this would have a huge effect and help maybe right some of these wrongs. And if it was, like I said, decriminalized and the records were also expunged, that lots of benefits could be made. Medical marijuana is one of the main reasons for pros for marijuana legalization. People who can help with chronic pain. You also have NSAIDs. Some people can get ulcers from these painkillers. These are just over-the-counter painkillers. You can get ulcers, you can get kidney disease. These people have a new way to help cure their pain. This is not to say that this is going to get rid of horrible pain, but chronic small pain. And research also shows that those who suffer from PTSD can benefit from it also. Here is a graphic of Texas's share of the of expenditures attributed to marijuana prohibition. It's a lot of money. So we can save quite a bit. So there are negatives. You are breaking federal law. marijuana dependence will increase, and as marijuana dependence increases, it's also been shown to increase binge drinking, which can also cause other health expenditures, along with the decrease in productivity. So there is productivity, people will be less likely to get a job or go and work, and health issues associated with marijuana or with binge drinking, cancer, and other sorts of diseases can be from that. Um, if you legalize it and you legalize for home growing, also tax money would also not be taken. Um, IQ loss is attributed with marijuana with prolonged marijuana use. Up to 8 IQ points, and you do not get those back. Depression has also been shown to increase with marijuana use, along with psychotic episodes. You're likely to become addicted, especially if you are under the age of 18. And marijuana also impairs people. So if you're operating machinery, a vehicle, it's going to slow your response time. You're going to become a hazard on the road. And I also found this to be interesting, though it's not something I necessarily agree with, but marijuana is not something that is biblical. It's not mentioned in the Bible. It's considered to be an intoxicant, and therefore people who, for religious reasons, it shouldn't be allowed. So what should Texas do? So Texas should legalize marijuana. This is not something that's going to be an immediate process, but it is something that should happen over time. And I'll lay out a 10-year plan that I have. And it would be decriminalization of medical marijuana use to finally legalizing recreational marijuana. The tax revenue, it's going to help with maybe an alternative fund for Texas schools, or maybe it can help Governor Abbott with his border wall, um, or the border police. New industry would come. Uh, College courses could be created in Michigan. Lake Superior State University has a program where for marijuana cultivation. Decriminalization is going to help lessen the burden on our police departments. It's going to help our corrections facilities, and it's going to free up even more tax money as a result. Minority communities would benefit. Rights or wrongs could be righted, and those who are ill would benefit from medical marijuana. So the change that I'm proposing to Texas policy is first is decriminalization. Starting at the 2025 legislative session, the state would decriminalize small amounts of marijuana. Joe Moody has also always proposed this. He can that same bill can just be brought up again, and those who had prior convictions, those can be expunged, and that record would be vacated by 2029. Considerable amount more time, another legislative session, and then one would pass. Medical marijuana would be legalized for the same specific diseases that are allowed in the compassionate use program. So that's epilepsy, PTSD, cancer, autism. And then finally, in 2035, recreational use of marijuana would be legalized. And the state would create their own program. They would tax it. They'd have their own regulatory agencies, and then cities would be allowed to vote if they were allowed to have dispensaries or not. In Michigan, my parent city voted no, but the city that they have their lake house, there's only 5,000 people in the city. They have 9 dispensaries in it, so they legalized it. But it's up to every single locality. You're probably not going to find these in rural Texas, but urban areas you will. So the likelihood of this happening of all 3 steps, I'd say, is different from each and every one. Since support is high and liberalization is happening on some level, the state legislature could pick this up, especially with decriminalization. The bill's already passed the Texas House twice, so this is probably the most achievable. Dan Patrick's not going to be there forever. He'll probably run for senator once Ted Cruz or John Cornyn moves on, and that will make it most likely. Will it happen in 2025? Probably not likely, but it will happen eventually, especially with local areas decriminalizing. Medical marijuana is less of a possibility. We already have the compassionate use program. Small parts need to be changed with that. However, a regulatory agency would need to be created, but medical marijuana could be expanded. Florida has it, and usually what Florida does, Texas will also do. And legalization of recreational marijuana, I think, is pretty much not going to happen. And I'd say the only way that's going to happen is if federal policy would change to make it legal. But who knows? And that could happen probably within the next 10 years. Texas also becoming a more liberal state, though not at a rate that a lot of people think, but it could happen. Here are my citations that I have. Hopefully you can comment on this and give your opinion. And I hope to hear from everybody.